Welcome to the District 5 City Council Debate, starring Dr. Brian Carr. Unfortunately, we have been looking for Karen Gibson since last Monday, and we have been unable to find her. If you know Karen Gibson or have seen her, please let the DPS troopers know. Brian Carr, is there anything that you would like to start the debate off with, an introductory statement?
I'm so pleased to be here tonight because I guess it's just really hard to get a date for me in this town, particularly with one person who I'd most like to talk with. And so I'm pleased to be here tonight so we can have what is truly a video opportunity for the people to ask me questions and to understand my position. And so I welcome the opportunity to have my opponent come. I have made it clear that I will debate her anywhere, anytime, in front of any audience on any subject. And I think that with that broad a range, she should come. But I believe that she is of the opinion that she can just pull the wool over the sheep's eyes and let us not have a chance to know really where she stands. So I'm really delighted to be here tonight for District 5 City Council.
Thank you, Ryan. Now, the first question I have is, what do you believe that are the issues that have the highest priority that you would like to address in the next 4 years? Do you see a long-term focus on these issues?
You know, I was born in Lubbock, grew up here. I have lots of my family here since 1932. And I think we do need to take that long-range focus for this city. Lubbock is very much a different place than the one that my father arrived in those early days. It was a small rural community, and I think it could be governed in a way where you could very easily have a town hall meeting and get most of the town in the hall. But over the years, Lubbock has become very much a diverse community, many different engines that run to make it productive and very viable. And so when we talk about these, we have to recognize that we're in a new forum, we're in a new setting. And so I think that when we look at these long-term issues, of which the citizens should be aware that in the next 4 years, we're going to be making some of the biggest decisions that this city has ever seen when it comes to water, when it comes to electrical generation, that we're going to take a $1.2 billion debt and look at the possibility of doubling that debt to cover these outlays of expenses for these projects. And so I think that that is even more important then to have a person like myself who has got a background in studying issues and coming to conclusions to guide us in those ways. And so, you know, I think one of the first issues has got to be water. That nowadays, I remember growing up as a kid that you could drive out the Slayton Highway and just see the water in the fields pouring along. And yet, agriculture has changed its practices, and I think that we have to change our practices too. And so my proposal would be that we continue to certainly develop the idea of conservation, that apparently our water department has said that they're really going to put some teeth in that ordinance, and people can expect $200 or better fines if they're not being within the guidelines of conservation. At the same time, we need to explore the use of gray water or reclaimed water, and I think that those are important aspects. But let me say that I think that one of the most important things is that we look at new sources of water. And so recently I was reading in Time magazine about how El Paso has one of the largest desalination plants in the country. When you look around the world, you can see how the country of Israel now takes 40% of their ocean water and turns it into drinking waters for their citizens. So this technology is evolving. And I believe that we've already seen there are some projects ongoing at Texas Tech. And so my call would be, if I'm on the council, to ask for a partnering with Texas Tech and other universities and colleges to get them to help us understand and to develop the technology, and that we then deploy that so that we can take advantage of the fact that right underneath our feet is another aquifer. It may be one that you've never heard of. It's called the Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa aquifer is little known because it's of little use because the water is very brackish, meaning that it's high in salt. Well, with this technology of removing the salt from the water, we make it usable. And so we can combine the technology with the available supply, and then using the development of renewable energy sources, such as the wind turbine farm that's being built west of the city. And all those three together give us a really wonderful opportunity to use the water that's right under our feet. And I think that that is a much more viable source than continuing to punch holes into the Alagala aquifer and let that, we're draining that cup and we're just putting more straws in it. And Allen Henry has got its potential use, but again, the difficulty of that pipeline and further expansion there, $67 million for phase 2, is going to present problems. So I think that as we develop this evening's conversation, I'll talk about electrical in a little bit, but water is the most important thing. That we can import gasoline and oil, we can move energy to here, but water is going to be the issue, will remain the issue, and I think a long-term focus on that. Because part of the trouble is, historically, we've had city councils that they just kick the can down the road. And so they solve a problem for the moment, and then they gleefully go out and report, look, we've got, a new library. Another issue that I'll talk about here in just a minute, because I think, again, an example of poor management by my opponent.
Thank you, Brian. Can you tell us a little bit about how you saved the health department from being closed from your opponent back in 2011? Another question I have is, why do you think she changed her final vote so that she no longer opposed the closure?
I've learned politics are strange bedfellows. And in 2011, when I was on the Board of Health, which I've been a member now for 5 years, and 2 years I've been chairman of the board, in that July, I believe it was, early August of 2011, we were told by a news reporter who said, what do you think about the mayor and the council's plan to close the health department? Now, I don't know how you'd react to that, but I felt that as a member of the Board of Health, that was not the appropriate way for us to be informed that that was the intention. So I went to the mayor, the mayor at that time, and I said, what is this about? And he told me that, well, it's a done deal, that we can consolidate all that, we'll just farm it out to other community clinics and such, and we really don't need to keep that going. That I think that he believed it was just kind of low-hanging fruit, and that the people that it would most hurt, the children of this community, because the health department is where most of the immunizations are done, that didn't really seem to matter. And people have known me, and hopefully some of you watching tonight, you've known that I've always kind of had trouble with authority, and when I was told that there's nothing I could do, I felt even more compelled to go out and prove him wrong. So then we partnered with the Board of Health, or we partnered with the County Medical Society, which again, we had all the physicians who thought it was a tremendously bad idea to close that health department because they understand health and human services. And so we proceeded to do that. We got an online petition. We got 6,000 signatures in about 6 weeks of people who felt very strongly that we wanted to support that. I block walked. I appeared on radio. We got good coverage in the press. And what happened is that where previously it was clear that there were many on the council, including my opponent, who very much felt the health department was just an obsolete figment that didn't need to be continued. Well, when we walked into that council chamber, which was full of people who supported our convictions, and we presented that petition to the mayor, that lo and behold, we got a 7-0 vote to keep that health department going. And folks, let me tell you, that was kind of the beginning for me of understanding that you can fight City Hall. But even better, this election is about letting me go to City Hall and become a member of the City Council so that I can represent this community in efforts like this. Not just about everyone wanting to pinch a penny and not provide any services at all, but to bring more of the heart and soul of this city back into that council. Because I think that was an illustration of doing what was right and not just trying to cut costs that leave people and our children hurt.
Thank you, Brian. What is your definition of a fiscal conservative, and how would you see yourself in that regard?
One of the charges that's been levied against me by my opponent is to attempt this smear campaign of, well, he's just a tax and spend progressive person that is going to bankrupt the city. Well, what's interesting is that when you look at her voting record, she's voted repeatedly for increases in our budget. She voted for the $1.4 million that was allocated to the Lubbock North and East Economic Development Council. This is the group that we gave them $1.4 million, and they have since refused to tell us how they're spending it. Now, when questioned about that, she responded that, well, it gave her heartburn for that vote. It may have given her heartburn, but it emptied my wallet a little bit and emptied yours some. And I think that that's not acceptable, that she's going to have indigestion while other people are struggling to pay their bills. So I think the idea is that we need to see these opportunities to bring these issues out and to have that transparency that says, here's how we arrive at this decision. As I said, there's major decisions ahead of us, and they may be painful for us because we're having to correct problems of the past.
Thank you. What is your opinion about the city's current debt obligation? What strategies do you believe possible to deal with this massive debt?
You know, this goes back to the earlier question, where in this attempt to smear me as if I am so much tax and spend. You know, folks, anybody that knows me knows that I'm pretty frugal. I'm not quite as bad as my mother. She crumples up tinfoil and keeps it underneath the sink, I remember as a kid. But I do have a great respect for the dollar, my dollar or your dollar. And so I think that this is a false claim to lay on me. And that the real idea, though, is do I want to do what's good for the community? And do I want to have a reasonable sense of how we derive a vetting of those projects that are most important? And so those kind of complaints against me, I think is just an attempt for her to buy it, buy this seat, buy this election. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this video, is to give people a chance to ask me these questions and not simply rely on what special interest groups are going to want to paint me with in terms of saying that I'm this. But you know, it's sort of like the pot calling the kettle black, that if she's going to go after me, then she ought to be here explaining her vote. That she's, you know, does a fiscal conservative do things that hurt people while rewarding special interest groups? In fact, I wonder, you know, there's been talk about the monorail idea. Well, remember, my opponent is the one who took City Bus, cut the hours, cut the routes, and raised the fees. Where do you think she's going to go on the vote that might happen for that monorail, given that about 87% of her campaign contributions are coming from people who would benefit from such a project? So I just ask you folks, what do you get for that kind of money? What do you buy access? I think at a minimum that maybe she's a little quicker to return a phone call. My concern is there's a serious amount of money that she has in her war chest, and so I think there's a question of ethics there and whether or not she really represents my district.
How would you rate the present council in terms of their orientation to business as well as to social concerns?
You know, folks, I've been down there at the City Hall for about 5 years now. And when I can't attend City Hall meetings, I'm just nerdy enough that I watch them on Channel 2. I particularly like citizens' comments. I always thought that was really the most entertaining part of it, of some of the meetings. But I think to rate them, they're good people. They're well-intended. Some have greater, I think, analytical strengths than others. But really, the only person I take exception with on the current council is the person I'm running against. I think that I get along well with the rest of them, that I feel like I've got a good working relationship with Glenn. I feel that Victor and I can even break bread and talk. I think I've known Floyd Price for many years, back when he was on the force, and Latrell is a person that I've become acquainted with. She's very active in our Board of Health meetings. And Mr. Gelt, I think, seems like a very nice person who's coming along in his development. So I think that it's a good council. I think it could be better. And that's my concern, is that we need to grow this city with the best leadership we can get. And I think I'm the better candidate.
And what examples can you provide as to why your background and experience has qualified you for this position?
I think a strength that I brought to it is I've always had a real curiosity. I remember growing up as a young man, a youngster, that I had an amazing propensity to take things apart. Of course, as is often the case, I could take it apart, but I never could get it back together. But over the years, I have developed the ability to be very good at getting things back together too. But I think that curiosity is a strength, that I've never been simply satisfied with somebody else handing me information and then not asking some further questions. I think I've maintained a broad interest in activities. My father is a pediatrician here for over 50 years, taught me the importance of the science, and yet at the same time the compassion of caring for infants and small children who cannot speak for themselves. I think that my Uncle Werlick, my Uncle Wagner, maybe a hybrid of them. My Uncle Wagner was a pretty fire and brimstone politician back in the 50s and 60s. Ended up Attorney General for the state of Texas. and he was flamboyant. He knew how to draw a crowd and get their interest. My Uncle Warlick was more studious and kind of operated behind the scenes, but he taught me the importance of due diligence and study. And so I think that I'd like to think I've inherited those qualities and can bring those to the council of that research base. I think also with my own background is I have a bachelor's from Texas Tech University, my master's is from St. Mary's University in San Antonio, and then my PhD in counseling psychology is from Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana. All of those degrees required effort. They required study. My PhD dissertation involved, I went into a small town in Indiana, and I studied the effects of when a plant closed and basically wiped out a third of that city's economic base. And I found that, interestingly enough, the children of the workers of that factory, they were cared for. There was state money for them. That there were programs and efforts to reach out and help them. And I found, though, that the group that was really zapped was the group of people who made living off the people who worked at that plant. They were the woman that was the bank teller. They were the man that was the auto mechanic. And when there were fewer cars and fewer people at the bank, those people got laid off and nobody looked after them. And so I think that, I'd like to think that over the 25 years as a psychologist in this community, that I've championed the cause of those people who don't have a voice, those people who may be limited by economic or other factors. And so I think those are strengths of mine that I would like to bring and say that I represent this, I'm in District 5, but this is about the fact that I'm a citizen of Lubbock, and it's not an east side thing or a west side thing. It's a Lubbock thing, and I think that you're going to get more of that from me than the other.
Thank you. I think a question on everyone's mind is, can you chew gum and walk at the same time?
I like the fact that we put a little humor in tonight's debate because, I don't know about you, but we're kind of getting a little long in the tooth now in this political season, and I know that you folks hear the same song and dance about what politicians are going to do, etc., but I think a little levity is nice. I will tell you that I can walk and chew gum. One difficulty I have is that I spent 3 years in the Monterey High School band, and I spent 4 years in the Texas Tech band. And so the trouble is that I tend to walk 8 to 5 or 6 to 5, according to where the yard lines are, because I did it so much when I was in school. So I can walk and chew gum. I can also play a trumpet and walk and march. And I love my years in the going band from Raiderland because it really let me have a little fun.
Thank you. Do you have any business dealings with developers, real estate, or major commodities in the city?
Again, I think a major difference between myself and my opponent is it would be difficult to try to flood me with money through my practice. As I said, I'm a psychologist. I've been in practice for 25 years. When I came back to Lubbock, I worked for a year and actually established a department of behavioral medicine at St. Mary's Hospital. It was a brand new program, and I built it. Then a year later, because it was so successful, I just asked the hospital to release me because I wanted to go into private practice so I could have some new endeavors. But, I think that along the way that I've had to manage my own money and practice, and I think that that's given me that sense of watching what I spend along the way.
Thank you. And which makes for better barbecue, beef or pork?
That's a tough one. I like beef ribs. I can tell you that when I lived in Indiana one summer, I went to the butcher at the Kroger's and I asked him as to, well, where were the beef ribs? And he looked at me as if I was from Mars and told me that actually they just grind those back up and feed them to the cows because people up there, they do pork. And so I'd have to say that I'm probably more a fan of beef. I don't want to lose the pig vote, I guess you could say, and say it's not good too. But I do think that, of course, the key's in the sauce. And anybody knows that every good Texan, male or female, works on having a good sauce. And so I'll let you know that mine's got a little mustard in it. It's got some brown sugar and some white sugar and a little ketchup. But vinegar is what tops it off. And I won't tell you the exact combinations of those, but my stuff's good.
right around dinner time, Brian, so the way you're describing that barbecue makes me just want to go get something from Rudy's right now. But can you give us an example of how you overcame a major obstacle in your life?
You know, even though at this point in my life I'm really pleased that I've achieved so much professionally, personally, academically, but one thing I like to share with people is that growing up, whether you want to call it the troubled middle child with an older brother and a younger sister, or just the nature of the 60s and 70s, I was not such a good student. That I think my love of music, my band director at Monterey, Doyle Gamble, was a person who kind of kept me on a footing until I could pull things together. But when I graduated high school from Monterey, I was 605 out of 720, which you don't have to know statistics to know that doesn't sound very good. My high school guidance counselor, a very, very nice fellow, told me that based on my standardized testing, that he recommended that as to my post-high school plans, he thought getting a job might be the biggest challenge for me, and that I really wasn't college material. And I've taken that to heart, that when I started Texas Tech, that I really didn't think I could do very well. But you see, the trouble was I didn't have a plan. That I always had the capacity, but it didn't help when I was told that, well, you're just not that smart. And yet, over time, I began to realize that, you know, if you just do a couple of common things, like get up, go to class, read the book the night before the test, it wasn't really that hard. And so I came away understanding that it's really just about effort. And as one wise man once said, success is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And so I've learned that I wish I could learn quicker than other people do, but I can learn. I can learn anything. Some stuff takes a little longer. And so this has really been a philosophy of mine, of championing the person who maybe has been told that because of their background, their neighborhood, the color of their skin, their religion, that they can't succeed in this city, that they just need to accept that that's their place. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's no reason why there should be any kind of those kind of discriminations, and that we should champion our children and let them know that truly the sky's the limit for what they can achieve. But we've got to support that. We've got to be able to look at our partnering with the educational systems here. We've got to have those programs that will keep kids in school and keep them involved and not just write them off. I mean, with Texas being #1 for high school dropouts, that is not a status that I want to feel good about. That Lubbock has a lot of problems, and I think if we come together as a community, that we can solve those. But first and foremost, it's very personal for me, that I was not always as sure of myself as I am now, but that confidence based over the many years of schooling and the success that I've had, I would hope to show as a model for those members of our community who need that extra encouragement to really step up and step out and better themselves.
You have claimed that your opponent is owned by special interest groups, such as developers. Why is this a problem, and do you oppose development in the city?
I don't oppose development. I think it's great that, particularly District 5, the way that we grow out there. But I have a concern when we don't have checks and balances. That, you know, when the campaign contribution forms came out and we had to file them, I took my form, or the people that had contributed to me, and I did an analysis, and I looked at Ms. Gibson's. And you know, it's very telling that in 2010, that she raised about $7,000. And in 2014, at least as of March 31, she's raised $37,500. Now, she's had 2 fundraisers since April 1st. And so I suspect that thanks to those fundraisers, that you are probably witnessing the most expensive city council race in the history of Lubbock. Now you've got to ask yourself, why is that much money being thrown around? Now what's curious is when you look at an analysis of the people who contribute to her, you'll recognize the names. They're well known. They're very prominent developers. They're very prominent real estate people. They're people who have been leaders in this community, but they're also people who have made up very well financially. And so, again, I'm not against a profit. I'm against a heinous profit. I think that I have no trouble with innovation and sometimes being bold and taking a step out. But what I don't appreciate is how it seems like these deals are cut behind closed doors, and we never really know who these figures are. And I think one particular case is, as I said, if you look at the developers, that one in particular contributed $7,000 to her campaign. And this individual has been identified as a person who is inking the deal to buy the Godbolt Center down near Texas Tech. And I've heard that he has no plans at this point to do anything about it, but that possibly he'd like to knock it down and build a hotel, or possibly a parking garage, as he has built over by Jones Stadium, and that this would be a good profit for him. And I just wonder, and you folks think this up. So you get $7,000 from one individual. Do you think you answered that phone a little quicker? Do you think that perhaps you want to listen a little bit more intensely as to what he thinks needs to be done? And this is even more relevant when you consider that zoning changes in this city. That, you know, if you're a major developer and you would like to see a change in zoning, well, you take it first to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And if they turn you down, if they say, no, we don't think that's a good idea, then you can appeal to the City Council. Every month, there's about 10 to 20 of these appeals that the council hears. Now, again, folks, I just want to suggest to you, so if there's 10 to 20 of these appeals that come before you, and you've raised most of your money from people who are the ones making these appeals, I think there's a concern there. That if you look at her average contribution, it's about $1,000. If you look at my average contribution, I mean, it's about $150. Who are the groups that represent or that have given me money? Well, about 20% are professional. MDs, PhDs, educators, CPAs, attorneys, people who I've known in some cases for many years, and others who have just found me and have said, we want to support you. Second big group, retirement. A lot of people are retired. They're on fixed incomes. And I think they know that I'm going to be a champion for them in terms of making that dollar go further and ensuring that we don't put more of a burden on them than is something that we can all equally share. And then the other is my family, that we've raised money from members of my family, and so that's certainly been helpful, but it's an entirely different group of backers. And I just want to bring that out in the light because I think that it raises questions in my mind with that serious amount of money. And I fully expect that she's going to take that money and it's going to be used in a massive campaign, that what she's counting on is that not many of y'all, or the ones watching this video, she might worry about. She's just counting on the regular Joe who's just trying to get by, who is not going to know anything about the issues, and they're going to see her signs everywhere, and they're going to see all of her ads everywhere, and then hopefully she'll keep this a clean race. But if she devolves into some sort of smear campaign for me, that the thought is that the citizens are stupid, and that she can get by with all this. And so part of why she's not here tonight is because she has nothing to gain and everything to lose. So I think you look at her background, you look at where her money's coming from, and it's, again, I think a very clear decision about who needs to be on the council.
In the battle against synthetic drugs, what are the differences between your approach and your opponent's approach?
You know, the other night at the debate, I made the point of saying that sometimes I can get kind of worked up about stuff, and I'm gonna blame her for some of the questions that she asked, because it just gets me riled up. And as I said, for 25 years I've practiced as a psychologist and have a very large caseload that keeps me busy. Well, about 2 years ago I started hearing about this synthetic marijuana or herb or bath salts, and these are all legal drugs, legal compounds which are labeled as not for human consumption. But come on. Everybody knows the wink, wink, nod, nod of how they're using it. And these are smoked. I mean, they call them potpourri, but let me tell you, this is not the potpourri that you get at the mall. This is some green leafy substance that we spray a chemical compound over that we don't even know what it is, and then they sell them, and there are strong addictive processes. I've had clients of mine that have had seizures, And I've even known of clients, or I've had a client of mine who died. So part of what really irritates me is when I hear people take the stance of, well, this is free enterprise. And yet I liken it to when I was in San Antonio, the problem that I saw there with inhalants. And I think that we recognized back in the 80s that, if a store is selling gallon buckets of model airplane glue, they're not using it to put together little airplanes. And I think that we just need to recognize and pull these people out. Now, my opponent, I think, she's gotten this ordinance passed, which classifies these compounds as illegal. And that's a good first step, but it lacks the missing ingredient of enforcement. I've talked to the DPS crime labs. They will not test for these substances because it's a misdemeanor. So we can't get the assay that we need to identify these drug compounds. So therefore, enforcement is impossible. And let me make a point here too. Since this ordinance was passed 15 months ago, we have had 0 prosecutions under this ordinance. It has done 0 to change what's going on there. There was an initial flurry of some shops were visited and things were confiscated, but let me tell you, they're right back in action. So my proposal, 1, we put pressure down in Austin and in Washington to increase the sanctions for the possession and distribution of these drugs as felonies. When we do that, we now get the interest of the crime labs who will participate with us. I think we can also, as a city, begin to develop some of our own assay methods and recognize that we need to deploy those out in the field so that the police have in their field kits the ability to test for those substances. So that's the law enforcement side. And then we drag these son of a guns into the court and we make them do a dance, and if nothing else, hopefully get them to realize they don't want to spend all that money defending themselves. 2, I think that we have to have public education. And what's really interesting is when I first started looking at this, to think that what we needed to do was educate the kids. But let me tell you, your kids are educated. They know what's going on. We can broaden it, we can deepen it, and give some maybe better information. People are completely clueless are adults and parents and grandparents who they've never heard of these substances. So that's where the education has got to come, because we've got to know who our enemy is and know what it is. And even the point of saying that, I recently took some heat from one of the shop owners because I published his shop address as selling these substances. And I will stand my ground and say that I've taken what is just in the interest in the public domain. I've said that these shops are selling these substances, and they are. And if they want to take me to court, then I think they can take me to court. And I'll win the case. And they're going to have to spend a lot of money to do it. And I'm not afraid of that, though, because when, you got to do what's right, even if all around you're doing wrong. And I think that last part, public protest. I really salute the WASP people that's Warriors Against Synthetic Pot, because I think that they're out there in front of those stores exercising their First Amendment rights, carrying signs, and one of them is even getting dressed up as a Grim Reaper. And I like that, because I think that we want to educate the public, and then we want to have a protest out there saying, if you folks are frequenting these shops, hey, there are other shops that sell cigarettes. Go to those shops, because those shops don't sell these poisons that are killing our kids. Go elsewhere. And I think that we've got to have action. So my opponent, I think she responded to the emotional appeal of the moment back when this all came before the council, but she's been completely ineffective. And I tell you that, again, you get me out there on a task, you get me on a campaign, and I'm a dog with a bone, and I will go after them, and we're going to win this, because it is not acceptable for this to be in our community.
Thank you. What do you see as the relationship between local colleges and universities and sustaining the economic development for the city?
I think we need to remember that part of why Lubbock is when the decision was made to locate a major university here back in the early 20s. That's a difference. And I think sometimes we're so quick to say we have to raise our taxes, we've got to get more money to do these projects. And yet I think if we will partner with Texas Tech, Lubbock Christian, South Plains College, Wayland Baptist, that these institutions can help us really bridge that gap so that we can start off with their efforts funded by monies that they obtain that are not monies raised through taxes on the citizens here, and investigate things like wind technology, desalination, electrical conservation, all of those things. And so I think that's a very important step, and not something to where we sort of, on occasion, every once in a while, we think, well, we ought to maybe call and see what tech's doing. I think we need to have tech very much integral to this in all the universities and colleges, because they're the brain trust. And education is the way out, folks, that we gain nothing by not educating our youths. And I remember that when I started tech, that I could basically do a long semester, and it'd be maybe about $1,000. Well, today, it's about $6,000. And that's cutting our kids out, and they're not able to go to college, and they don't have really, there's no other programs there. And so I think we need innovative programs. We need maybe more programs that are more pragmatic and aimed at helping people to develop trades and crafts, skills that put them right into the workforce. But education is so key, and ultimately it's what's going to, I think, propel Lubbock into a really bright future.
How would you view communication and transparency if you were elected?
I talk for a living. My family pretty much talks for a living. My great-grandfather was a Methodist circuit rider. He apparently talked a lot for a living, and was pretty stern about when my dad and his brothers kind of got off the narrow path. So I think communication is vital. And again, I think that's one of the problems, is citizens are left to wonder, well, how do I get a word in? Phone calls aren't returned, emails are left unanswered. And so I think that we've got to have that good communication. Now, I'll tell you folks the same thing I tell the people I work with. Call me, in between appointments. If something happens and you got a question, call me or email me. I'll call you back. Now, life's pretty busy, and so I may not call you back until, 8 or 9 at night. But I call you back, because I learned that, it's sort of at the feet of my dad, who taught me that, being a pediatrician and taking care of kids wasn't just a 9-to-5 job. That I learned that we would go out, and we had an old Studebaker, I think it was, and we'd go out for dinner, and then Dad would sit there and say, well, let me do a little quick house call. I need to check on a child. And we'd all wait out in the station wagon while Dad ran in. That personal service, I think, is something that's left a lot of healthcare, and I don't know that we can get it back. But I promise you, as a council person, that the important thing is that we proceed to let ourselves feel that sense of connection with the council and be able to advance.
Thank you. How do we as a community better support working class families and single mothers?
We have to realize that the demographics of our society are changing. That I heard someone the other day comment, we had a statistic showing when you look at the degrees of births among Anglo, Hispanic, African Americanist community, and how in the African American community, how that number was quite high. And yet, the comment I remember hearing from this person was that basically we just need to get those folks to act more like our ethnic group. And I think that's a simplistic view. That we have to understand some of these differences and appreciate that, have a healthy respect for that, and then proceed to work within the communities and not, it's sort of like healthcare. It's great that we have clinics that are there that people can go to, but what's even better is when we take the clinics and we put them out there with the people. That under my tenure with the health department, we got sufficient funding to buy a van that we drive around for immunizations. And I think that's a great idea, to move out into the community so that if, while you're out at the grocery store, if you can get your flu shot, and of course we got the best rates in town at the health department. It's cheaper than anybody else. That we need to offer those services and reach out and not make this a brown, a white, a black thing, but sit there and say it's a people thing. And we have to help all parts of our community. And yet, again, I do get concerned sometimes that there are some people who probably never been east of Avenue Q and have no idea of what goes over major parts of our city. So I hope that could change. And so in that communication, that we can bring that, and then, transparency, you tell me if you think that you understand what goes on down at City Hall. If sometimes it seems like they just kind of pop things out and tell us that, oh, well, the decision's been made. And I think that's very egregious, that we live in a democracy where people need to be heard. And so I hope to get more people to turn out, and they feel like that if, like I said, you may not always agree with me, but you'll know how I got there, and I'll be willing to talk to you about it. And I think that's very important in the future.
Brian, how has Lubbock changed over your lifetime?
You know, I think when I was growing up, we lived on 59th and College, now University. And if my brother and I could crawl up on the roof, and we could see the movie from the Golden Horseshoe Drive-In. And you know, if the wind blew out of the south, we could hear the movie too. And I remember that Lubbock was a very quiet, sedate community. That I remember when the first 7-Eleven opened at 52nd and College. And my brother and I were so delighted because at last we had a store we could go to that was open on Sunday, because everything shut down. Tumbleweeds blew down the streets of this town on Sundays. I remember how the streets pretty much ended at the Loop, and you got outside of that, and it was there was just dirt. And that's been a long time ago. And of course, as I talk to my father, and he tells me stories about how when they first moved here, he lived way out in the country at 26th and A, and he just had to ride his bike all the way down. They had a hole-in-the-wall gang that got to go to the football games, and he delighted in Lubbock at that time. But you know, Lubbock's changed, and we're much more metropolitan. We've got big city issues. We've got big city issues that require serious money, and so I'd like to retain as much as we can of that old city. I think, unfortunately, we've demolished so many important historical structures that were the history of this community, and these are done, I think, often really just for the profit of a very few. And so, if we can realize the importance of preserving our past, while at the same time looking for new solutions that allow us to grow, that's a Lubbock I want to be a part of. Not one that's all just shiny steel and the latest, but something that gives me a sense of a perspective of what it was like to live in this town when everybody went downtown and everybody knew everybody. And I'd like to think that we can preserve some of that and keep this a great place to live.
Thank you. And the last question I have for you, what do you hope to be remembered for?
I think that we all have a hope for a legacy. And I guess I'd start by saying that when I think about my own family, that they were just the most ordinary of men and women. And yet I think that the lessons that they taught, the ones of just do what you say you're going to do, pay your bills, be where you say you're going to be. Even if you sing badly in church, sing loud. It's in difficult times, I think, that you get a sense of the character of people. So we have many different issues that have to come about. And I think that that's when we need good citizens to step up. And so I would hope that as I'm advancing into this cause to join the city council, that some of the people out there would say, I need to do something, whether it's in your neighborhood, whether it be in your church, that you reach out, get on a commission for the city, participate. If you watch this video, realize that this election is going to be determined by probably just a few thousand people. Be one of those people. That Lubbock has got great citizens. And I think the trouble is that the good citizens we have, which are the majority of the community, they fear the extremes on either side. The people on the left or the right who have the megaphones, who are just so nasty, who want to parade around and intimidate and exacerbate and just kind of make the whole thing so distasteful that they just want to walk out. So I think the challenge for me, the legacy of saying, get involved. This is not somebody else's problem. This is my problem. It may not have affected me as directly as others, but we got to get that spirit back in this country and understand that when we all pull together, such as again with the health department, 6,000 signatures, it was really more about organization than having to sell the idea. So if you want to make Lubbock the best place it can be, the key there is step up and go talk to your neighbor. And if you see something that doesn't seem right, go make a difference about it. And then just as important, if you see something that is right, go make a difference and stand up for it. Participate in this city's events. Go down to 4th on Broadway. It's a great time. Go to the old Settlers reunion and hear the stories of early Lubbock. Go and support the Red Raiders, support the Chaparrals, support all of the different universities that we have. You want to know how to keep your kids off of drugs and out of gangs? Know your kids. Know who their friends are, know what they're doing. And it doesn't have to be invasive. Of course, they'll think it's invasive, but that's the best way to do it. And see, so at the individual level in your family, then that's one way you can do it. But just realize that as you move up, it's really the same issue. It's just more of us. And so I'm hoping that tonight, if you've had a chance, as you've had a chance to watch me, that you can make a judgment. And again, I would point to, there's an empty chair sitting here right next to me. And it's empty because my opponent doesn't think that you are going to notice. And she thinks that she can just buy this election and that then they go right back to the business of making money. And yet I just think that, I'm the one to sit down and pay my bills every month. And so the best way I can handle my bills is to get out there and make sure that they're no more than they have to be and that we've got reasonable people doing it. So folks, I appreciate the evening or the time that you spent here with us tonight. And if you have any questions, I want you to give me a call. Please go to carforlubbock.com and read up about me. Got a lot of video on there. I want you to be able to read and watch and understand me. So I'm open. I'm available, and you can get to know me. And I hope you allow me to serve on your council, to where I may at times be a little pesky with people, but these are times when we need that. We just don't need this straight vote that never gets changed. And so that's, again, the difference of this election. And so the reason I'm doing this is because I believe in the people of Lubbock.